Silence is sometimes the most powerful scream. Those words, my friends, hit harder than any argument, any text, any explanation you could ever throw out there. Think about it. You could spend hours defending yourself, proving your worth, begging them to understand. But the moment you stop talking, the moment you step into silence, the game changes completely. Suddenly, they are no longer hearing your words. They're hearing their own regrets. Now listen, before we dive deep, go ahead and hit that like button, press subscribe, because what we're about to uncover is something that can completely shift the way you see relationships, breakups, betrayals, and even friendships. Stay with me until the very end, because this isn't just about silence. This is about reclaiming the power they never thought you'd find. Hey folks, imagine this. You walk into a room you used to fill with laughter, noise, and energy. This time, you say nothing. You sit down, calm, collected, and the silence itself feels heavier than a thunderstorm. Suddenly, the people who used to thrive off your reactions don't know what to do with themselves. It's like turning off the music in the middle of a dance. They're left standing there, awkward, exposed, realizing how much of the rhythm came from you. That's the thing about silence. It doesn't just remove sound, it removes illusion. Marcus Aurelius once said, "If it is not right, do not do it. If it is not true, do not say it." That's the core of this dark silence we're talking about. It isn't about punishing them with the cold shoulder. It isn't about being petty or childish. It's about stepping back and refusing to waste your breath where it is not valued. You stop dancing to their music, you stop playing the role they wrote for you, and in that quiet pause, you watch their world begin to tremble. Because here's the lie you've been sold, that if you don't explain yourself, if you don't fight back, if you don't prove your worth, they win. But my friends, that's not the truth. The truth is, every explanation you gave was fuel to their fire. Every argument was a rope tying you tighter. Every desperate attempt to make them see your side was just another reminder that they still had control over your emotions. Silence is where you cut the rope. Silence is where you remind them that your peace is no longer up for sale. Think about a candle burning in a dark room. When the flame is gone, the shadows stretch long, and people suddenly realize how much they depended on that small light. That's you. When you go quiet, when you withdraw your energy, they begin to notice the void. The texts you don't reply to, the calls you don't return, the explanations you don't offer. It all echoes louder than words ever could. They feel your absence, not just in their ears, but in their chest. Seneca once wrote, "It is the power of the mind to be unconquerable." And that, my friends, is what your silence becomes, unconquerable. You don't need to convince anyone anymore. You don't need to debate or defend. You simply stand, anchored, unshaken, and let them wrestle with their own conscience. And trust me, that fight is far more brutal than anything you could ever say. So don't let anyone trick you into believing your silence is weakness. Don't let them convince you that you owe them noise to prove your strength. Silence is not weakness, it is restraint. It is the sword you never swing, but everyone still feels. It is the storm that never breaks, yet leaves them drenched in regret. And right now, I want you to lock this into your spirit. My silence is power. Write those words down in the comments right now. Say it with me. My silence is power. Because folks, the moment you believe that, you stop being their puppet and start being your own master. Hit that like button, subscribe, and stay with me, because what's coming next will open your eyes even further. Number 1. The shock of your absence. Sometimes it's not your presence that haunts them, it's your absence. Those words sting, don't they? Because deep down, you know the truth. It's not what you said, not what you shouted, not even the arguments you left unfinished that weigh the heaviest. It's the silence you left behind. That silence is a ghost that follows them into every room, every late-night thought, every quiet moment when their mind won't let them rest. Think of it like this. Imagine a house that was once filled with constant noise, the hum of conversations, the laughter, the arguments, the footsteps echoing down the hall. Suddenly, it's gone. The rooms are still the same, the walls unchanged, but the silence inside becomes unbearable. Every corner feels empty, every chair feels colder. That's the shock of your absence. It is not emptiness, it is presence multiplied by 0, which is louder than any sound you could have made. They expected you to react, didn't they? They expected the yelling, the chasing, the long messages explaining why you were hurt. They expected the old version of you, the one who scrambled to prove your worth, the one who explained and justified until your voice went hoarse. But when you gave them nothing, when you didn't play the game, their stomach turned. Because what are they supposed to do when the person they relied on for drama, validation, or even comfort no longer feeds them? That's where fear creeps in. Questions start spinning in their mind like a broken record. Why aren't you responding? Did I lose my grip? What if they never come back? What if this silence means they're finally free from me? They'll never admit it out loud, but the fear is real. Your silence becomes a battlefield where they fight themselves, where they wrestle not with you, but with the shadow of their own choices. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "The best revenge is not to be like your enemy." Think about that. The old you might have lashed out, given them a reaction, and fallen right back into the trap. But now, your silence means you've stopped being like them. You've risen above the noise, you've broken the cycle, and they feel that shift like a cold wind blowing through their pride. At first, they'll try to pretend it doesn't matter. They'll tell themselves, "I don't care, I never needed them anyway." But that's a lie. If they didn't need you, why does the silence echo so loudly? Why does your absence feel heavier than your presence ever did? Why does every memory of you return, uninvited, in the quiet moments they can't control? Here's why it's so difficult for them. Your silence is unpredictable. They knew how to handle your anger. They knew how to twist your words when you explained yourself. They knew how to use your guilt against you when you over-apologized. But silence? Silence gives them nothing to grab onto. They can't twist it. They can't fight it. They can't manipulate it. And that helplessness is what drives them toward regret. Picture it like this. For years they thought of you as a light switch. They flip it up, you shine. They flip it down, you dim. Every word, every reaction, every burst of energy from you was something they could count on. But one day they flip the switch, and nothing happens. The power has been cut off at the source. That's what your silence does. It shows them you've taken your power back, and nothing terrifies them more than realizing they no longer control the current. Seneca once said, "It is not the man who has too little, but the man who craves more, that is poor." They crave the version of you that begged, explained, and reacted. That version gave them more than they ever deserved. But now, your silence exposes their poverty. It shows them how much they depended on the energy you once gave away freely. They are left craving, and craving is a kind of torment. But here's the lie they'll cling to. They'll tell others you've gone cold, that you've changed, that you've become arrogant or heartless. Don't buy into it. What they're really saying is, "I can no longer control them." Your absence reveals the truth. They weren't drawn to your soul. They were addicted to your reaction. And when the reaction is gone, they're left to face the reality that they brought this silence on themselves. This is why rising from fear is so hard, because silence isn't easy for you either. At first, you'll feel the pull to break it, to explain yourself, to make them understand. You'll wonder, what if they think I don't care? What if they misunderstand me? But let me tell you something, my friends. The moment you break the silence for their comfort, you hand them back the very power you worked so hard to reclaim. Carl Jung once said, Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. Your silence irritates them, unsettles them, drives them restless, not because of you, but because of what it reveals about them. Their regret is not born out of love, it's born out of exposure. Your absence holds up a mirror, and in that mirror they see what they lost, what they neglected, what they thought would always be there. So let them feel it. Let them sit in it. Let the silence do what your words never could. This is not cruelty, it is clarity. This is not punishment, it is power. You are not their echo anymore. You are your own voice, and sometimes that voice speaks loudest when it says nothing at all. And here's the truth you must hold on to. Your silence is not weakness. Your absence is not emptiness. Your stillness is not surrender. It is strength. It is mastery. It is the reminder that you do not need to explain yourself to those who refuse to listen. You do not need to fight for space in the lives of people who never valued your presence. So write this down in the comments right now. Type it, declare it, show yourself and show the world. My silence is strength, because that is exactly what it is. Your silence is the storm that clears the air. It is the sword you never swing, but everyone still feels. And it is the quiet proof that you no longer live to be controlled. You live to be free. And if this is the shock of your absence, imagine what happens when silence not only unsettles them, but begins to break down every illusion they once built around you. Stay with me, because what comes next will open their wounds deeper than words ever could. Number 2. Silence as a mirror. The things you hate in others are often the things you cannot face in yourself. Carl Jung said that, and it cuts deep because it's true. My friends, this is where silence stops being just quiet and starts becoming dangerous. Not because you are hurting anyone, but because you are reflecting back the very things they've spent their lives trying to bury. Silence is not empty. It is a mirror. And when you stop talking, when you stop reacting, when you refuse to explain yourself again and again, you become something far more unsettling than an opponent. You become a reflection. Think of it like standing in front of a still lake. The water doesn't speak, it doesn't argue, it doesn't explain, it just reflects. And for the person looking into it, the reflection is not always easy to face. They see every wrinkle, every scar, every shadow. That's exactly what your silence does. When you don't engage, when you don't break character to soothe their ego, you force them to confront their own reflection. And sometimes that reflection is ugly. They wanted you to be noise. They wanted you to argue, to yell, to cry, to prove them right about you being too emotional or too sensitive. Because as long as you made noise, they could point the finger at you. But silence leaves no excuses. It leaves no ammunition. It leaves only them, standing face to face with what they did. That's why it unsettles them so deeply. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "If someone does wrong, the harm lies in their own action, not in your response." And that is what silence embodies. You are no longer trying to carry their guilt. You're no longer trying to clean up their mess with your words. You simply stand still like a mirror and let their actions echo back into their own conscience. Imagine a person who lives in chaos. They thrive on it. They feed on arguments, manipulation, and noise. When you step into silence, it's like shutting off the oxygen to their fire. And what happens when fire has no oxygen? It suffocates. They suffocate. But not because of you, because they are left with nothing but themselves. Here's the part they don't want to admit. It's not that they hate you now. It's that they hate what your silence shows them about themselves. It shows them the parts they've avoided, the selfishness they denied, the lies they told themselves to justify their behavior. They call you cold, distant, arrogant, but what they really mean is, your silence is making me see myself, and I don't like what I see. At first they'll laugh it off. They'll say you're being dramatic, that you've changed, that you're fake now. But inside, the mirror has already been placed in front of them, and every time they look your way, it reflects back the truth they've been running from. That's the power of silence. You don't have to accuse. You don't have to defend. Your very stillness accuses them far louder than your words ever could. Think of it like a theater. For years you played your role. You read the lines they wrote for you. You stayed small so they could feel big. You explained yourself so they could feel justified. And then one day you walked off the stage. The play is still going, but the main character is missing. And the audience, your friends, your family, maybe even your partner, they are left staring at an empty spotlight. That's what your silence feels like to them. It breaks the illusion, it shatters the performance. And suddenly they're forced to realize the whole production was never real connection, it was control. Seneca once said, "The greatest remedy for anger is delay." Silence is that delay. It keeps you from reacting, from falling back into the same traps. But for them, that delay is unbearable, because while you're calm, they are spiraling. They begin to think, what are they doing without me? Why aren't they chasing? Have they moved on? And every question they ask is just another crack in the mirror. The truth is, silence forces accountability. Words can be twisted, explanations can be ignored. But silence lingers. It sits heavy in the chest. It replays in the mind late at night. And it reminds them, again and again, that the problem was never your reaction. The problem was always their action. But here's the lie they'll spread. They'll say, you think you're better than them. They'll call you selfish. They'll paint you as the villain in their story. Why? Because it's easier to throw stones at the mirror than to look into it. If they can convince themselves and others that you're cold or cruel, they don't have to face the truth your silence has exposed. And you, my friends, must not fall for it. Do not feel guilty for what your silence reveals. You are not responsible for the shadows they see when you stop talking. You didn't create those shadows. You only stopped covering them up with your noise. Yes, it will be difficult, because silence is not easy for you either. You'll feel tempted to break it, to rush in with words, to rescue them from the reflection they're drowning in. But don't. Do not rob them of the lesson your absence teaches. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do, for yourself and even for them, is to let them face the mirror. Epictetus reminded us, "No man is free who is not master of himself." And that's what you are learning through silence, self-mastery. You are no longer driven by the need to be understood by those committed to misunderstanding you. You are no longer trapped in their chaos. You stand still, anchored, unshaken, and in doing so, you give them the greatest chance to confront themselves. Whether they take it or not, that's not your burden. So let them hate the reflection. Let them call it names. Let them say you've changed, because the truth is, you have. You've changed into someone who no longer explains their worth. You've changed into someone who no longer dances for approval. You've changed into someone who no longer mistakes noise for connection. And right here, right now, I want you to write it in the comments. Declare it boldly. My silence is my mirror. Because that is exactly what it is. It reflects not only their truth, but your strength. It shows them what they lost, and it shows you what you gained: clarity, freedom, mastery. Show them, show yourself, show the world around you that silence is not emptiness, it is exposure. And stay with me, because if silence is a mirror, then the next truth is even sharper. What happens when the mirror doesn't just reflect their flaws, but shatters the very strings they once used to control you? That's where the war begins, and that's where your freedom takes on its most powerful form. Number 3. Breaking the cycle of control. No man is free who is not master of himself. Epictetus said those words centuries ago, and yet they cut right into the heart of what we are talking about today. My friends, freedom is not always about breaking physical chains. Sometimes the chains are invisible, woven out of guilt, manipulation, expectations, and noise. And nothing breaks those chains faster than silence. Because silence is not just the absence of sound. Silence is the refusal to be controlled. For so long, they pulled the strings, didn't they? They knew exactly which button to press, which word to use, which wound to poke to get a reaction out of you. They learned your patterns. They studied your emotions like a script, knowing that if they accused you of being selfish, you would rush to prove your generosity. If they gave you the silent treatment, you would chase them, beg them, fill in the emptiness with apologies you didn't even owe. If they raised their voice, you would shrink just to keep the peace. In their mind, you were predictable. You were programmable. They thought they had the remote control to your soul. But then something shifted. The moment you chose silence, the moment you stopped reacting, the cycle cracked. Imagine a puppet on a stage, strings tied to every limb, dancing the way the master commands. Then suddenly, one by one, the strings snap. The puppet doesn't dance anymore. It just stands still, free. The master looks confused, frustrated, even angry, because without the strings, there is no show. That's what silence does. It cuts the strings. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." And that's exactly what you're doing when you choose silence. You are reclaiming your mind. You are saying, "I don't owe you my reactions. I don't owe you my explanations. I don't owe you my energy." You are realizing that the only thing you can truly control is yourself, and that is enough. Now let's be real, this is not easy. Because breaking the cycle means fighting against every instinct you were conditioned into. You were trained to react. You were taught to explain, to fix, to smooth things over. That was the pattern. That was the role. And silence feels unnatural at first, because it is new territory. But new territory is where freedom begins. They feel the shift immediately. Suddenly, the old tactics don't work. They throw guilt at you, nothing. They accuse you of being cold, still nothing. They withdraw, hoping you'll chase, but you don't move. That's when the panic sets in. Because control is like a drug, and your silence is cutting off their supply. They begin to realize that their power over you was never real. It only existed because you gave them access. And now, the access has been denied. Think of a fire that's always been fed by oxygen. As long as you reacted, you were the oxygen. But when you step into silence, you remove the oxygen. And what happens to the fire? It flickers, it weakens, and eventually it dies. That's why your silence feels suffocating to them. Because it exposes the truth. Their power was never theirs. It was always borrowed from you. But here's the lie they'll tell themselves, and others. They'll say you've changed for the worse. They'll say you're selfish now, that you're heartless, that you're not the person they once knew. Why? Because they can no longer pull your strings. They don't miss you. They miss their control over you. They don't regret losing your presence. They regret losing the version of you who made their life easier at the expense of your own peace. And this, my friends, is where many of you stumble, because you hear those accusations and the urge to defend yourself rises. You want to shout, "I'm not selfish, I'm just protecting myself." But silence breaks the cycle precisely because you don't defend yourself anymore. You don't argue with lies. You don't dance when they play the same old song. You stand still, and the stillness itself becomes your truth. Seneca once wrote, "It is the power of the mind to be unconquerable." That is what your silence is becoming, unconquerable. Because no matter how hard they try to bait you, no matter how many traps they set, you refuse to step back into the cycle. And that refusal is what terrifies them the most. Because deep down, they know the truth. They can no longer control what they didn't create. Let's be clear, Silence is not weakness, it's not avoidance, it's strategy, it's strength. It's looking at the cycle of manipulation and saying, not this time, not anymore. And yes, it will shake them. Yes, it will make them uncomfortable. But that discomfort is not your responsibility. It is the sound of the cycle breaking. Think of a wheel that has been turning the same way for years. Every argument, every guilt trip, every outburst kept it spinning. And then one day, you step back. You stop pushing it forward. And the wheel slows. It wobbles. It grinds. And finally, it stops. That's what silence does. It stops the cycle. And when the cycle stops, they are forced to face the stillness, the truth that they no longer control the narrative. Now here's where your fear comes in. You'll wonder, what if they walk away? What if my silence makes me lose them completely? But think about it. Did you ever really have them if the connection only existed through control? Did you ever really belong in a relationship or friendship where your peace depended on their approval? The answer is no. Let them walk. Let them go. Because if the only way to keep someone is to let them pull your strings, then they were never keeping you. They were keeping a puppet. Your silence declares the end of the performance. No more roles, no more scripts, no more cycles. Just you, standing free, standing clear, standing in your truth. And that truth is not up for debate. So the next time they try to bait you into breaking the silence, remember this. Every word you don't say is another string cut. Every reaction you don't give is another step out of the cycle. Every moment of silence is another act of freedom. And right here, right now, I want you to declare it. Write it in the comments. Show them. Show yourself. Show the world. My silence breaks control. Because it does. Your silence is not emptiness. It is liberation. It is the moment the puppet walks off the stage and refuses to dance ever again. Stay with me, my friends. Because if breaking the cycle of control is powerful, then what comes next is even more revealing. What happens when your silence doesn't just break control, but begins to plant the seeds of regret deep inside their chest, until it grows into something they cannot escape? That's the next step, and trust me, it cuts even deeper. Number 4, their regret begins in isolation. We are more often frightened than hurt, and we suffer more in imagination than in reality. Seneca spoke those words, and they pierce right into the heart of what silence does to them. Because, my friends, when you go silent, when you pull away, when you stop feeding the cycle, they are left alone. And it's in that isolation that regret begins to grow like a shadow that stretches further and further until it swallows the whole room. At first they act unbothered. They might laugh, shrug, or even mock you. They tell themselves they don't need you. They may even tell others you were the problem all along. But inside it's a different story. Because silence is not just the absence of sound. Silence is a mirror, a weight, a storm that creeps in when the world gets quiet. And when you are no longer there to absorb their chaos, they are left with themselves. And for many people, being left with themselves is the scariest place to be. Picture this: a person sitting in a crowded room, laughing, talking, busy with distractions. On the outside, everything looks fine, but when the noise dies down, when the lights go out, when the phone doesn't buzz, they're left alone in the dark. And suddenly, the laughter they forced earlier feels hollow. The quiet becomes unbearable. That's when your absence begins to haunt them. Not because you shouted, not because you slammed a door, but because the silence you left behind lingers longer than any fight ever could. Marcus Aurelius once said, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." But here's the problem. They don't realize this. They never learned to master their mind. They only learned to master yours. And now that your silence has taken that away, their own mind turns against them. They start to replay moments, conversations, mistakes. They wonder, did I push too far? Did I lose something I'll never get back? What if this time the silence doesn't end? Regret doesn't roar at first. It whispers. It slips in at night when the world is quiet. It shows up in those small gaps of time when distractions aren't enough. A song comes on the radio, a memory flashes back, a familiar place reminds them of you, and suddenly silence isn't peaceful anymore. It's punishment. Not punishment from you, but from their own conscience. This is why your absence hurts more than your presence ever could. When you were there, they could blame you. They could twist words, shift guilt, deflect responsibility. But now, with silence, there's nothing to twist. There's no argument to distract them. There's only the memory of what they did, and the reality of what they lost. Think of it like planting a seed. The first day, the soil looks the same. Nothing has changed, but underground, the seed has begun to break open. Roots are forming, unseen. That's what your silence does. On the surface, they pretend nothing is wrong, but inside, the seed of regret has been planted, and with every day that passes, it grows. They replay your absence over and over, and the roots of regret dig deeper. Carl Jung once wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." Your silence forces their unconscious into the light. It makes them face the parts of themselves they tried to bury. And because they're not ready to face it, they don't call it truth. They call it loss. They call it regret. They begin to feel the weight of choices they once brushed off. Here's the lie they'll cling to. They'll say they're fine without you, that life goes on, that your silence doesn't matter. But my friends, let me tell you something. The louder someone insists they don't care, the deeper they care. Because true indifference doesn't need to announce itself. Silence announces it. And if your silence truly didn't matter, they wouldn't feel the need to convince themselves and everyone else that they're fine. In isolation, the truth creeps in. They start to realize that the comfort they once felt came from your presence, your energy, your willingness to stay even when it hurt you. They realize that without you, the room feels colder. The laughter feels forced, and the peace they pretended to have is actually emptiness. That's where regret begins, not in losing you, but in realizing they lost the version of themselves they only felt when you were around. Imagine a house after the electricity is cut. For a while, you can light candles, you can distract yourself with small things, but eventually the darkness becomes undeniable. That's what your absence feels like. At first, they're light little distractions, new people, social media posts, shallow laughter, but eventually the power of silence grows stronger than any distraction. The house is dark, the silence is heavy, and regret becomes unavoidable. Seneca reminded us, "He who is brave is free." Your silence is bravery. Their regret is the prison. Because they are not free, they are chained to the weight of what they didn't appreciate when they had it. They sit in isolation, replaying every moment, every word, every choice that led to your silence. And that loop of replay is what drowns them. Now let's be honest, it's not easy for you either, because silence tests your strength too. You'll wonder if they miss you, if they regret, if they'll ever admit the truth. But here's what you must remember. Their regret is not your responsibility. You are not here to rescue them from their conscience. You are not here to break your silence, to soothe the guilt they earned. You are here to protect your peace, your energy, your growth. And while they sit in isolation, haunted by regret, you are learning freedom. Because regret belongs to those who never valued what they had until it was gone. But peace belongs to those who stop abandoning themselves for the comfort of others, so let them feel it. Let them drown in the silence they once mocked. Let them wrestle with the regret your absence has carved into their nights, because that regret is not punishment, it is truth. And truth always comes, whether they're ready for it or not. Write this in the comments right now. Claim it, declare it, make it yours. My silence plants regret. Because it does. And every time you choose silence over reaction, you are planting seeds, not just in them, but in yourself. Seeds of peace, seeds of strength, seeds of freedom. Stay with me, because if regret in isolation is heavy, what happens next is even more unsettling. What happens when their regret grows so strong that it turns into a war inside their own mind, a war they cannot win? That's where we're headed next, and trust me, you'll want to hear this. Number 5, the war they fight in their own head. The mind is its own place, and in itself can make a heaven of hell, a hell of heaven. John Milton said that, and my friends, you'll never understand the full weight of those words until you've seen what your silence does to them, because when you stop feeding the noise, when you refuse to argue, when you walk away into silence, you don't just take yourself out of the battlefield, you turn their mind into the battlefield, and it's a war they cannot escape, because the enemy is no longer you, it's themselves. At first, they won't admit it. They'll laugh. They'll act like you're nothing. They'll post pictures, share jokes, maybe even go out of their way to show how little they care. But the show is just that, a show. When the lights go off, when the crowd goes home, and when the distractions fade, their mind takes center stage, and in that silence, the war begins. Picture it like this. Imagine a soldier who's been trained to fight an enemy out in the open. They've studied the terrain, memorized the strategies, and always had a target to blame. But suddenly, the battlefield goes quiet. The enemy vanishes. The soldier looks around and realizes there's no one left to fight but themselves. That's what happens when you withdraw into silence. They can no longer project everything onto you. They can no longer twist your words or manipulate your emotions. The only person left to wrestle with is the one in the mirror. And that fight is brutal. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." But my friends, this is where their weakness is exposed, because they don't have power over their mind. They never did. Their power came from controlling yours. They fed off your reactions, your emotions, your apologies, but now they are stuck with their own thoughts, their own mistakes, their own guilt. And instead of strength, they feel the chaos of regret gnawing at them from the inside out. Here's the truth. They replay everything, the things they said, the things they didn't say, the way you used to respond, the way you don't anymore. They remember the look on your face when they pushed you too far. They remember the moment you stopped fighting back. They remember the silence that followed. And in their mind, those memories play like a broken record, on repeat, over and over, until they can't stand it. The war in their head has no referee, no finish line, no victory. It's an endless loop of what-ifs. What if I push too far? What if they don't come back this time? What if the silence means they've finally outgrown me? And with each what-if, the battlefield grows bloodier. But the blood this time is their own. Think about how people used to control you. They gave you the silent treatment to make you chase. They criticized you to make you prove yourself. They pulled away just enough to make you run after them. That was their strategy. But silence flips the script. Now, you don't chase, you don't explain, you don't argue, and because of that, their strategies collapse. Their mind starts asking, why didn't it work? Why aren't they playing the game? Have I lost the grip I thought I had? Carl Jung once said, "Who looks outside, dreams. Who looks inside, awakes." And your silence forces them to look inside. But instead of awakening, they panic. Because what they see inside themselves is not peace, it's chaos. They see selfishness, manipulation, weakness. They see the brokenness they've tried to hide. And instead of taking responsibility, they lash out in the only way they can. Not outwardly this time, but inwardly. They attack themselves with shame, doubt, and fear. Here's the dangerous part. The war in their head doesn't just stay in their head. It leaks into everything. It poisons their relationships. It keeps them awake at night. It makes them restless, paranoid, anxious. They check their phone more often. They scroll through old conversations. They hover over your name, wondering if they should reach out. But they don't, because pride holds them back. And so the war rages on. Silence versus pride. Guilt versus denial. Regret versus ego. And none of it has peace. Imagine being trapped in a room where the walls are mirrors. No matter where you turn, you see yourself. You can't escape it. That's what your silence feels like to them. Everywhere they turn, it reflects back their choices. And the harder they try to escape, the louder the reflection becomes. That's why your silence hurts more than any fight ever could. A fight ends. Words fade. But silence lingers. It stalks them. It chases them into their dreams. It whispers when they're trying to sleep. Epictetus said, if someone succeeds in provoking you, realize that your mind is complicit in the provocation. But here's the beauty of where you are now. You're no longer complicit. You've stepped out of the trap. You've taken back your peace. The provocation doesn't land anymore. But for them, the opposite is true. Their mind provokes them endlessly. Their conscience won't let them rest. Their imagination punishes them more than you ever could. And let's be clear, this war they're fighting, you didn't start it. You simply stepped out of it. You stopped playing the role. You stopped fueling the fire. And without your energy, without your words, without your participation, their mind turned inward. The war is theirs. The battlefield is theirs. The wounds are theirs. But here's what you must hold on to. Their war is not your responsibility. Their regret is not your burden. Their sleepless nights, their racing thoughts, their shame, that belongs to them. And you belong to your peace. Still, silence tests you too. You'll be tempted to break it, to throw them a rope, to explain yourself so they don't suffer. But if you do that, you hand them back the control they lost. You jump right back into the cycle you fought so hard to escape. Don't do it. Their suffering is not cruelty, it's consequence. And consequence is the only teacher some people will ever learn from. So let them fight their war. Let them wrestle with their conscience. Let them sit in the silence until it burns. Because you are not punishing them. You are protecting yourself. And sometimes the best protection is distance. The best response is no response. The best victory is letting them lose the war they started inside their own head. Write it down in the comments right now. Let it be your declaration, your shield, your anchor. Their war is not mine. Say it, type it, claim it. Because the moment you embrace that truth, you are free. Their chaos is theirs to battle. Their regret is theirs to carry. And your silence is the proof that you've stepped out of the battlefield, never to return. Stay with me, my friends, because if the war in their head is brutal, what happens next is even more devastating. What happens when they realize that silence itself cuts deeper than words ever could? When they understand that no argument, no noise, no explanation could ever wound them the way your stillness does. That's where we're going next. Number 6. Why silence hurts more than words. Words may sting for a moment, but silence can echo for a lifetime. My friends, let that sink in, because this is the truth they never want to admit. Your silence is more lethal than anything you could ever say. Why? Because words can be argued with. They can be twisted, denied, dismissed. But silence leaves no defense, no distraction, no escape. It forces them to sit in the quiet chamber of their own conscience. And there, regret doesn't just whisper, it roars. Think about the last time someone said something cruel to you. Yes, it hurt. Maybe you replayed it a few times in your head. But eventually, the words faded. They blurred with time, softened at the edges. Now think about the last time someone you cared about gave you nothing, no response, no explanation, no closure. That silence you remember. That silence lingered. It followed you. It made you question yourself. It made you wonder what was left unsaid. That's the proof, folks. Silence wounds in ways words never can. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "If it is not right, do not do it. If it is not true, do not say it." Silence is built on that very principle. It is restraint. It is wisdom. It is you saying, "I will not add to the noise. I will not feed what does not deserve my energy." And that restraint is exactly what makes it hurt more, because they can't argue with what you haven't said. They can't twist words you never spoke. They can't dismiss accusations you never made. Your silence leaves them with nothing but themselves, and that is the sharpest cut of all. Imagine this. Someone throws an insult at you. You don't react. You don't defend. You don't even look their way. You stay calm, anchored, untouchable. What happens? The insult falls flat. It doesn't land where they wanted it to. Instead of you being wounded, they are left unsettled, because what hurts more than someone fighting back is someone refusing to fight at all. Your silence becomes the heaviest weight in the room. Carl Jung said, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves, and that's the role your silence plays. It irritates them, it unsettles them, it cuts them deeper than your anger ever could, because in the quiet they are left with themselves. They are left with the reflection of their own choices, and it doesn't feel good. Words are external. They hit the ear, they sting the pride. But silence is internal. It pierces the heart. It echoes in the mind. When you go silent, you hand them over to their own thoughts. And thoughts, my friends, are relentless. Words can be forgotten. Silence becomes unforgettable. Here's the lie they've been telling themselves: that they are strong enough to live without you, that they are unaffected, unshaken. But silence cracks that lie wide open. Because silence is felt, not heard. It's felt in the unanswered text. It's felt in the phone call that never comes. It's felt in the empty space where your laughter, your voice, your energy used to be. And the more they try to convince themselves it doesn't hurt, the deeper it digs into them. Think of silence like an empty room. When it's full of people, full of noise, you don't notice the walls. But take everyone out, leave the room bare, and suddenly you notice every corner, every echo, every creak in the floor. That's how your silence works. It empties out the room of their life, and suddenly they notice all the flaws they used to hide behind your noise. Epictetus once said, "It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters." And here's the brilliance of silence. It's not a reaction. It's a refusal to play their game, a refusal to hand over your peace, a refusal to be controlled by their drama. And that refusal, it slices deeper than any argument could, because while you're calm, steady, composed, they are unraveling. They are spinning in circles, trying to figure out why you didn't respond the way you always used to. Words end the moment they're spoken. Silence begins the moment words stop. And that's why it hurts so much. It doesn't have an expiration date. It lingers. It echoes. It becomes the background music of their days and the haunting noise of their nights. Every time they check their phone and see no reply, every time they hope for a reaction that never comes, every time they realize you're not explaining yourself anymore, that's when silence cuts them again, and again, and again. Here's where it gets real. Silence forces them to confront loss. They can deny your words. They can argue back. But they cannot deny the empty space where you used to be. They cannot argue with absence. And absence is louder than presence ever was. They begin to realize what they had, not when you were there, but when you were gone. That's the cruel paradox of silence. It makes them see the value of what they dismissed. But for you, silence is not cruelty. It's clarity. It's not punishment. It's protection. You're not trying to hurt them. You're trying to heal yourself. You're trying to step out of the cycle where your energy was drained, your worth was questioned, your peace was always on trial. And in choosing silence, you finally choose yourself. They may call it cold, they may call it heartless, they may say you've changed, but what they really mean is that your silence has stripped away their control. They can't push your buttons anymore, they can't make you beg. They can't drag you back into the mud, and that loss of power hurts more than any insult you could ever throw at them. Seneca once wrote, "The greatest remedy for anger is delay." Silence is that delay stretched into eternity. It's you saying, "I will not react. I will not rush. I will not waste my fire on those who only came to watch me burn." That kind of restraint terrifies them. Because they can't predict you anymore, they can't control you anymore, they can't handle the fact that the old tricks don't work. So let them hurt. Let them drown in the silence they once thought was harmless. Let them realize that the loudest thing you ever did was walk away quietly. Because silence is not weakness. Silence is not surrender. Silence is strength. And strength, when it's quiet, is the most dangerous thing in the world. Now, my friends, I want you to lock this truth into your spirit. Write it down in the comments. Declare it for yourself, for your healing, for your freedom. My silence speaks louder. Say it, type it, claim it. Because that's what makes you unshakable. Your silence doesn't just hurt more than words. It frees you from the chains of reaction and reminds you that your power was never in your voice. It was always in your choice. And stay with me, because if silence hurts more than words, then the next truth is even greater. Silence doesn't just wound them, it transforms you. It becomes a weapon of detachment, a shield of mastery, a discipline that turns chaos into clarity. That's the power of choosing detachment, and that's exactly where we're heading next. Number 7. The Stoic power of choosing detachment. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. Marcus Aurelius wrote those words nearly 2,000 years ago, and my friends, they ring truer today than ever. Because this is what silence really is. Not just quiet, not just absence, but detachment. And detachment is where your real power begins. For too long, they had you tied up in their chaos. They knew how to reel you in. A sharp word, a cutting silence, a manipulative sigh. You'd feel it, you'd react, and the game would go on. But the moment you chose detachment, the moment you decided that not every insult deserved a response, not every rejection required a chase, not every silence demanded explanation, that was the moment you became dangerous. Not dangerous in the sense of cruelty, but dangerous in the sense of unshakable. Detachment is not coldness. Detachment is clarity. It is you standing in the storm without letting it soak you. It is you watching their games without stepping onto the board. It is you refusing to let their mood dictate your peace. That's why detachment feels so powerful, because it is the ultimate declaration. I am no longer your puppet. Think of it this way. Imagine you are standing in a marketplace and people are shouting, bargaining, begging for your attention. Every voice is loud, pulling you in 10 directions at once. If you engage, you're exhausted, you're overwhelmed, you're drained. But if you step back, if you fold your arms, if you quietly observe without reacting, the shouting becomes powerless. That's detachment. And your silence is the act of folding your arms against the noise. The truth is, they never feared your words. They feared the day your words would stop, because words gave them hooks to grab onto. They could twist your explanations, mock your defenses, weaponize your emotions. But silence. Silence gives them nothing, and nothing is impossible to fight. Carl Jung once wrote, "I am not what happened to me, I am what I choose to become." Detachment is exactly that. It's the choice to no longer be defined by what they did to you, but by who you decide to be now. You are no longer reacting out of wounds. You are responding out of wisdom. That is the shift. That is the freedom. And yes, my friends, it is not easy, because detachment requires discipline. It requires you to sit with your own discomfort, to resist the urge to explain, to fight back, to prove yourself. It means letting their silence stretch without rushing to fill it. It means letting their accusations hang in the air without scrambling to defend yourself. And it means walking away from battles that your pride desperately wants to win, because your peace is worth more than their chaos. That's why detachment is misunderstood. To them, it looks like arrogance. To them, it looks like coldness. To them, it looks like betrayal. But in reality, it is self-mastery. It is you finally saying, "I will not betray myself just to stay connected to dysfunction." And that, my friends, is one of the hardest lessons life will ever teach you. Picture a man standing in the middle of a raging river. The current is pulling, the water is fierce, and he's struggling to stay afloat. That was you once, always reacting, always fighting, always being pulled under by someone else's storm. But detachment is when you finally swim to the bank. You pull yourself out of the water, you stand on solid ground, and you watch the river rage without being consumed by it. That's power. Not because the storm stopped, but because it no longer owns you. Seneca once wrote, "He who is brave is free." And bravery is exactly what detachment requires, because it takes courage to step back. It takes courage to not defend yourself when everything inside you is screaming to. It takes courage to let them think what they want, to let them talk, to let them twist, and to remain unmoved. That courage is what makes you free, free from their approval, free from their manipulation, free from the chains of their chaos. And here's the irony. They will accuse you of not caring. They will say you've grown distant, selfish, unrecognizable. But the truth is, detachment doesn't mean you don't care. It means you care correctly. You care for your peace more than their drama. You care for your sanity more than their validation. You care for your growth more than their control. That's not selfishness. That's survival. That's wisdom. That's strength. The Stoics taught that suffering comes not from events themselves, but from our judgments about them. And detachment is you refusing to judge every silence as rejection, every withdrawal as abandonment, every insult as truth. Detachment is you stepping back and saying, "That's theirs, it's not mine." But let's not pretend it doesn't hurt. Detachment doesn't mean you stop feeling. It doesn't mean you stop caring. It doesn't mean you don't miss them or wish things had been different. What it means is that you no longer hand your feelings over for them to exploit. You no longer let missing them pull you back into dysfunction. You no longer let caring turn into self-betrayal. You feel, but you do not fold. You care, but you do not crawl. That's the difference. Think of silence as a fortress. The walls are not there to keep love out. They are there to keep chaos out. And when you stand inside that fortress of detachment, you are not cold, you are safe. You are not selfish, you are sane. You are not arrogant, you are anchored. And anchored people cannot be moved by the tides of someone else's mood swings. Marcus Aurelius once said, "If it is not right, do not do it. If it is not true, do not say it." Detachment is living by that principle. You stop explaining yourself where it's not right. You stop defending yourself where it's not true. You stop wasting your breath on people who only hear what they want. Instead, you choose stillness. You choose silence. You choose peace. And let me tell you something. It terrifies them, because they were comfortable with the version of you who reacted. They were safe with the version of you who explained. They knew how to control the version of you who feared being misunderstood. But now you are silent. Now you are detached. Now you are free. And they don't know what to do with that. So let them misunderstand you. Let them call you cold, selfish, arrogant. Let them say you've changed, because you have changed. You've changed into someone who no longer dances for approval. You've changed into someone who no longer trades their peace for someone else's comfort. You've changed into someone who finally understands that silence is not emptiness, it is everything. And right here, right now, I want you to write it in the comments. Show yourself, show the world. Declare it as your anchor. My detachment is power. Because that's what it is. Every time you choose silence over noise, peace over chaos, restraint over reaction, you are stepping into your power. You are stepping into freedom. Stay with me, my friends. Because if detachment is power, then what comes next is even more profound. What happens when your silence not only frees you, but drowns them in the very regret they thought they'd never feel? What happens when they realize they didn't just lose your voice, they lost your presence, your light, your energy? That's when silence becomes their punishment and your liberation, and that's exactly where we're going next.